All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to this evening's town hall Zoom event, Bird-Friendly Futures, Preventing Bird Collisions with Better Design. My name is Charles Clarkson. I am the Director of Avian Research for the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, and I would like to welcome you all to this evening's event. As some of you may know, in the past years, the Audubon Society has hosted the Birds Across New England, which is a regional conservation symposium that is designed to bring researchers throughout the Northeast together into one location here in Rhode Island and disseminate all of the research and work that they do to a general audience. The goal being that over the course of this day of talks, individuals become much more aware of the conservation issues birds are facing, and they leave the event at the end of the day feeling more empowered to be better stewards of the habitats and the avifauna around them. So although we were unable to bring you one of these symposiums this year because of our hectic work schedules, this evening's town hall is designed to be very much in the vein of our symposium, in which two professionals in the field of bird building collisions are going to be talking to you this evening about the important work that they do so that you are better informed about what the major issues are with regards to bird window collisions and how you might actually help to alleviate the issues that the birds are facing. So in my role at Audubon, I am the Director of Avian Research, and I oversee the Avian Research Initiative, which works in three main areas. The first of which is the collection of baseline data on the distribution, abundance, and habitat associations of birds that utilize the 10,000 acres of refuge land that the Audubon manages at any point during their annual cycle. These data, which were instrumental in the creation of our State of Our Birds reports, are largely volunteer collected. In fact, many of you this evening who are tuned in likely helped with the collection of the data sets that went into our baseline data reports. So thank you very much for your participation and contributions of time and effort. We also undergo quite a bit of targeted research with our 9 responsibility bird species. These are species that we have identified in the state that are currently common, but have been experiencing long-term population declines. And these are all species that have declined pretty steadily for the last 50 years. And for most of them, their decline here in the state of Rhode Island is actually larger than their decline at the regional scale. So a lot of our targeted research is aimed at understanding why, what are the primary or principal drivers of decline here locally, and how we might be able to better manage the habitats that we preserve for these declining bird species, with the ultimate goal of slowing, mitigating, and hopefully reversing the declining trends in these 9 species and the associated species. We would be remiss as a conservation organization if we didn't also take the knowledge that has been gained by the global ornithological community on what the principal drivers of decline are for birds, both here in North America and at the global scale as well. And so this work entails a lot of hands-on applied conservation, education, and advocacy work. For instance, educating people that one of the largest proximate causes of decline in birds is house cats, and by keeping your cat inside, you can actually contribute to saving something like 2.4 billion birds here in the US alone every single year. So education campaigns and applied conservation campaigns. We also know, for example, and something that you will learn tonight, that bird building collisions claim upwards of 1 billion individual birds every year here in the US. To that end, at the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, we have been conducting both residential and urban bird strike surveys for the last 2 years, with the end goal of better understanding what contribution to that overall mortality we see within the United States comes from the state of Rhode Island. So we have year-round collection in residential communities on window strikes, and we have dedicated surveys in downtown Providence that occur during both spring and fall migration. If you would like to contribute to these projects, we are always in need of new volunteers. Please do go to our website, which is simply asri.org, and sign up as a volunteer with the Avian Research Initiative, and I would be happy to work with you and get you going on one of these projects that we have in progress at Audubon. So next I will basically introduce our speakers for this evening. I'm very excited to have them both here. Before I do that, just a quick logistical note. During the next 45 minutes, they're going to be giving their presentation. I would ask that any questions you may have, you populate in the chat box. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Zoom, there's a toolbar at the bottom of your screen. One of those tools actually has a little bubble and it says chat. If you open that up, you can type your comments, your questions there. At the end of the talk, we will have a Q&A where I will be addressing all of those questions in the chat box first before we go to questions from the audience where you will unmute yourself. So please use the chat functionality. Now, without further ado, let me introduce our two speakers so we can get underway with this evening's town hall. Meredith Barges is a PhD student at SUNY ESF, chair of Lights Out Central New York, and a researcher studying urban regulations to protect birds in the built environment. Through her work, she helps people to appreciate how our decisions about buildings and lighting affect the survival of bird populations. She is a former policy researcher for the Yale Bird-Friendly Building Initiative, and in 2023, she co-led a statewide campaign to pass Public Act number 23-143, the Lights Out Connecticut bill, which requires all state-owned buildings in Connecticut to turn off unnecessary exterior lights from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. year-round for birds. Our second presenter is Vivica Morris, who is the executive director of the Law, Ethics, and Animals program at Yale Law School, a multidisciplinary initiative dedicated to addressing large-scale industrial abuses of animals and their impacts on the planet. At Yale, she has spearheaded multiple projects, including the Yale Bird-Friendly Building Initiative, a research initiative that aims to reduce bird collisions and accelerate the adoption of bird-friendly building design. Morris co-hosts and produces the Yale University podcast, When We Talk About Animals, which features in-depth interviews with leading thinkers about animals and the big questions that animals raise about what it means to be human. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to welcome Vivica and Meredith and let them take over. Thank you both so much for being here.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Charles. I'm just going to get started on this on our slideshow here. And how does this look to everybody? It's okay? Okay, great. So I want to start off by thanking Dr. Charles Clarkson so much for having us as part of the town hall. I'd also like to thank the Audubon Society of Rhode Island. This is a really important discussion, and it's wonderful to see so many people turning out to talk about bird collisions and how we can prevent them through better design. So I'm going to start off by saying that creating bird-friendly futures, it really needs action on 3 fronts. And we can do that by preventing bird collisions with better policy, which is something that Vivica and I worked on together at the Yale Bird-Friendly Building Initiative, and trying to pass laws and legislation that will set standards to protect birds in the built environment. Also, by changing people's attitudes and beliefs and their understanding about the importance of birds, and also at the level of design. And so we need to really bring these 3 fronts together in order to protect birds in a meaningful way. So tonight, we're going to be really focusing on the level of better design. So we're going to be talking about design treatments for buildings to prevent collisions on windows and glass surfaces, but then also lighting. And we're going to get a case study from Vivica on the Yale Bird-Friendly Building Initiative and the steps that they've been able to take there to both document the problem and also mitigate problematic buildings. So this is sort of the outline for this evening. I'm going to again start off with building collisions. Why do they occur? Which kind of bird populations are affected, and the solutions. And then we'll have our case study, and then go through strategies for minimizing light pollution, which also affects migratory birds and contributes to collisions. So this is a sobering statistic, and it's actually been upwardly revised just in the last few years. It used to be the common phrase was up to 1 billion, but now there's a research from Dr. Daniel Clem showing his estimates are as high as 5 billion every year in the United States. Birds die from colliding with buildings and structures. And people are basically saying probably at least 2 billion birds are dying every year in the United States due to collisions with buildings and structures. And the question becomes, why do birds collide with buildings? Now, we sometimes think of glass as a sustainable or benign material because it's biodegradable, but glass is a human-made, synthetic, fabricated material that hasn't been a regular part of the built environment, until really the last 70 years has it's taken its prominence in architectural design. And the issue with glass is that it creates optical illusions of both transparency and of reflectivity. As we can see in this photograph here, is that you can see on one level, you can see through the glass to the interior of the building, but at the same time, you can also see a reflection of what's outside the building. You can see on the lower level, there's some tree canopy. You can see maybe an adjacent building reflected. And so what we really have to understand, and people sometimes say birds can't see glass. Well, the thing is about, humans technically can't see transparency either, but we come to be socialized to know where glass is likely to be. But I really would like to emphasize the fact that glass is very unique in that it purposely creates optical illusions. It's one of the reasons why we like it, because then it allows in a lot of light. It opens up a space visually. But the problem becomes when glass becomes used to such a degree and that we're not noticing the unintended consequences of design choices, is that the glass ends up creating confusion and risks for birds, bats, even insects. You might see bumblebees sometimes banging against glass. So, and other kinds of insects, is that we have to take a different attitude towards glass and see it maybe in a little bit more of a critical light. So another scientific finding is that birds can collide, like any kind of bird can collide with glass. It's not just particular birds. There are reports of turkeys colliding with glass. We have, in this photo, we have a northern flicker. We have all these different northern parulas. Any range of bird, including raptors, can potentially collide with glass. Wherever you have an environment where there is glass and a bird, there is a potential for a collision. So we have to really keep that in mind when we think about the problem of the glass. But at the same time, we also know that some birds are at more risk than other birds. And let's just review for a moment what those birds are. You're probably used to seeing now in the news and in other spaces of photos of birds that are collision, that have been subject to building collisions. And so these characteristics I'm going to go through now are probably going to seem pretty familiar to you. First off, birds that are small-bodied, which makes sense because they think, they wrongly think that they can fit through different spaces, and they're more likely to collide. Also, songbirds in general, like as passerines, are more likely. Forest-dwelling birds, nocturnally migratory birds, or just migratory birds in general. And also a recent study came out that found that birds that call to each other while they're in flight, they're more likely to collide with a building. So we know that some birds are more at risk than others, and the problem becomes when these birds that are at more risk, that they're also suffering other kinds of conservation challenges like habitat loss and exposure to pesticides and also light pollution, as I'm going to get into later in the talk. But the challenge today is that glass has become such a popular and such a ubiquitous part of the architectural language that our society is using right now. And I say actually globally. So you have in the bottom right corner there, that is the visitor center for the Apple campus in Cupertino, California. And then in the left side is what would be the Google Helix. It's the possibly planned second headquarters that might be built in Arlington County. You can see how they integrate both glass and then also a lot of like green features, and that this poses very particular challenges for birds. And the question becomes, why is glass so common in commercial buildings? It just is extremely popular building material right now. But I just want to remind everyone that it's an architectural fashion and it's here now, but it may not be here in 20 or 30 years. But the legacy of all this glass will be around for a long time, and that poses a lot of challenges for birds. The consequences are billions of birds whose migrations are interrupted, whose lives are interrupted, and who suffer a lot of physical pain and experience high rates of mortality as a result of these architectural design choices. So here's a Nashville warbler that was found a few months ago here on my SUNY ESF campus. And you can imagine that this warbler now won't get the chance to carry out the journey. This was a returning, this would have been part of the fall migration to spend the winter, but won't be able to come back and reproduce and to contribute to the population. So it's really, it's impacting at the individual level, but also beginning to impact at the species level as well. Some of you may remember last October October of 2023, when in one night, well over 1,000 birds crashed into one building, McCormick Place in Chicago. And some of those birds did survive, and so the final death toll was a little bit fewer than 1,000. But this was a staggering number, and it really gave global attention to the problem of bird building collisions, and also the potential solutions, because as some of you may know, the McCormick Place has since been retrofitted, and the number of collisions, when normally they would have like 700 in one season, they only had about 18 or something like that, like fewer than 20. So the McCormick Place example shows both the enormous problem, and you can see here all those small-bodied, forest-dwelling, nocturnally migratory birds that all crash in one morning, and also the design solutions to this problem. And I'll just say that this problem is having in the context of a significant decline in bird populations in North America, with that 2019 study that many of you may recall that shows that 3 in 10 birds have just disappeared from the landscape. So we're dealing with a huge net loss of birds from a lot of different conservation pressures. But I'm sure that many of you who are on this Zoom call appreciate that we can't imagine a world without birds. The world without birds is not an option. Birds matter to ecosystems, to they're seed dispersers, they move around nutrients, they are excellent at controlling insects and pests. And so birds provide what are sometimes called environmental services, and are calculated as such that they contribute enormously to economies and to the healthy functioning of agriculture and different ecological spaces. But more and more appreciation is being given to the role that birds play in providing for human well-being at the level of emotion and at the well of affective influences. That there's studies showing that when we hear bird songs, that it's good for our mental health. And so it's in our interest to keep birds around for so many reasons, that it's really could be a selfish reason that we got to keep these birds around. So as I said, effective solutions are available. These are all examples of what are called bird-friendly buildings. These are buildings that have been purposely designed to prevent bird collisions. On the left there is the visitor center for the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. And on the right is a subway station in Minneapolis. And you can see that they incorporate art, they incorporate different kinds of materials, they're dynamic, they're unique, they're not just glass boxes. So there's a lot to appreciate in the designs of a bird-friendly building. And now I'm going to get into some of the different solutions at the level of design. So there is in bird-friendly standards an idea of a 2x2 rule. 2 inches by 2 inches is that when you have a glass surface that you want to interrupt the transparency and reflectivity with either some kind of a visual pattern or like some kind of treatment that will break it up with a minimum of 2 to 2. And this is because some of our smaller bodied birds like the brown creeper or hummingbirds may attempt to tuck their wings and fly through patterns that are spaced more wider than, or wider than a 2 by 2 rule. But basically the glass treatments should follow the 2 by 2 is the general standard today. And here are some examples of, I'm going to start to go through, of different glass treatments. And these are permanent solutions. These are different glass products where they've been treated in a manufacturing phase. So these throughout their lifespan will remain bird friendly. So you can see there's like dots on this Isolar Ornilux. Here's an example of the SkySafe bird-friendly glass, which uses an acid-etched technique that creates what's sometimes called visual noise, so that birds will recognize that there's something there and not fly into the building. I also think this has a biophilic aspect. I'm not sure, but I think it was sort of inspired by like a birch bark. And here's a Walker Textures velour finish. It's an Avi Protec, which has a different pattern. It's like a crackling pattern on the exterior surface, and you sort of see it almost looks like vines growing or a crackling effect, and very biophilic as well. And then here's an interesting product called the Onyx Solar Design. These opaque glass panes also produce energy because they're photovoltaic. So they are producing solar energy just as glass panes, and they also double as bird friendly. They've been rated as being bird friendly. Now, when it comes to, and those were all examples of glass that was manufactured to be bird friendly. So they're from the time that they leave the factory, they're ready to be installed and they'll be bird friendly. Now, the issue of what do we do with existing buildings? There are a lot of different retrofit options. There's the feather friendly that many of you are familiar with, like the dots, sort of like that first photo I showed. But here is a set of different film patterns that can be printed and applied to a window, and a lot of them, there's a huge variety, and all of them follow that 2 by 2 rule. And then we have like other kinds of low-tech solutions like twine, rope, or netting that can be incorporated into the design of a building, or sometimes this is all DIY more, but like paint or tape, if properly spaced with a 2 by 2 spacing. Those are all also glass applications. Now, another solution are exterior screens. On the lower left there is the School of Environment at Yale, and has a very interesting exterior screening that actually was intended to prevent a lot of like solar heat gain. Sometimes glass, because it has a low insulation rating, it just generates a lot of, it ends up collecting and passing through a lot of solar heat. And so those spaces can be a little bit warm and uncomfortable for occupants. And so in this case, it was intended to be to break up that heat from the sun, but it has a doubling effect. This isn't necessarily a bird-friendly building, but this is an example of an exterior screen. And then also on the upper right is the Beta. They're actually developing the first electric-powered airplane, and they have these screens on their outside of a large expanse of glass at their headquarters, and they're based in Vermont. And you can also have lower tech screen solutions like insect screens on the exterior, as long as they're the exterior, and then also these kind of like vertical moving exterior blinds. Those also work. Now, at the same time, there are a set of architectural features that pose particular risks to birds for collisions, and we know that sky bridges are particularly hazardous for birds. Because they both are reflective and transparent, and they're really, it's harder. You can imagine that birds aren't used to just having an expansive glass in the middle between two buildings, and so there's a lot of mortality at sky bridges. And because of that, these kinds of architectural features should always be treated, no matter where they are in a building, along with glass corners that create very, very dangerous optical illusions. So that's when two pieces of glass meet. So these design features can be particularly dangerous for birds and either should be avoided or should be treated. Something should be changed about the design to make them less dangerous. Also is freestanding glass on the left there. I know I was recently at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, and they installed just a complete row of freestanding glass right near a large amount of vegetation. And so you can imagine that. Why would birds think or imagine that there would be a solid barrier right in the middle of a habitat? And so to be very careful about the use of freestanding glass, to avoid it wherever possible, but where it has to be used, to always treat it with some kind of bird-friendly either film or decals. And also glass near rooftops. And you can see where the intersection of vegetation and glass makes it particularly dangerous, where birds will be attracted to, say, that tree that's on the other side of the glass fence, and then they'll end up either injuring themselves or dying. So the recommendations in terms of design for preventing bird collisions is to treat the highest risk zones. And this is following the American Bird Conservancy's 100 by 100 by 100 rule, which is to treat all the 100% of the facade. So every exterior facade on a building on 100% of the building up to the first 100 feet. So that's just not to leave anything out below that 100 feet. So treat everything below the first 100 feet and on all of the different facades. That means, because interestingly, like the policy in San Francisco, you only have to treat certain facades that are facing vegetation. But the American Bird Conservancy says all of the facades, because a bird can move around a building. So in terms of design, this is the real bird-friendly standard. And a lot of policies, I don't want to get into policy too much here, but a lot of policies do come close to this. And we recently have a municipal bird-friendly building policy in Washington, D.C. that does meet this first 100 feet above grade threshold. And again, we want to follow the 2x2 rule. And you want the exterior application. So the treatments can't be on the interior glass, has to be on the exterior to break up both the transparency and the reflectivity. And just want to say that bird-friendly building design should be thought of holistically. So how do you integrate different elements and design elements to make a very dynamic building? And I'll just say, bird-friendly is the future of design. You know, that's sustainable design, and they're beautiful. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Vitka.
Thanks. As Charles said at the beginning, I lead an initiative called the Yale Bird-Friendly Building Initiative, which started in 2022 with some funding from the university here, and has taken on several projects since then, which we've been lucky to have Meredith involved in. And one of the main projects that the initiative has taken on is focused on monitoring bird collisions on Yale's campus and in the surrounding area, and then working to develop a data-driven action plan for the university to try to reduce collisions both at new and existing buildings at Yale. And so the goal in undertaking this is both to hopefully tangibly reduce the number of collisions occurring on campus, but also to try to aspire to create a gold standard and model of what a bird-friendly building campus could look like, and share that with others. So let's go to the next slide, please, Meredith. Many of Yale's older buildings feature stained glass, mullions, and other design characteristics that make them very easy for birds to see and avoid. They're bird-friendly by default. But at many of the modern buildings that have been built up on Yale's campus over the past few decades are these massive glass facades like this one, which is the Yale School of Management building. And we knew anecdotally that bird window collisions were occurring frequently. Unfortunately, when this building was built in 2014, bird-friendly design principles were already fairly well studied and understood. But unfortunately, nonetheless, the design contains pretty much every single feature that Meredith described that makes a building deadly for birds, including 130,000 square feet of highly reflective and often transparent glass. It also includes a courtyard with honey locust trees in the middle that lure the birds in, and then they struggle to escape and generally collide to their death. So starting about 5 years ago, we began informally gathering data in partnership with the custodians at this building on the bird collisions that were occurring. Next slide. And so we knew from this project anecdotally that bird collisions were a big problem. Just through this partnership with the custodial staff at one building, we found more than 400 birds of more than 50 species from 2018 to 2022. So that was roughly 100 carcasses being collected per year. And it's conservative to estimate that this building has therefore killed, thousands of birds since it opened, and will kill many thousands of more birds over the course of its lifetime if it's not retrofitted at scale for safety. And so that's just one building on campus. It's the building that inspired us to get started on this, but the university has over 520 owned and leased buildings. So there are a lot of opportunities to better protect birds. Next slide. It was clear from the very start that bird window collisions are a PR problem for institutions as well as a bird carcass problem. People care very much about birds. We've certainly seen this on Yale's campus, and many folks were starting to post about their concerns about finding dead birds in and around this building and other buildings prior to the launch of our initiative. Next slide. So starting in the fall of 2022, for 4 migration seasons, we embarked on a much greater scale monitoring effort that we named the Yale Bird-Friendly Building Initiative. And what this looked like was for 8 weeks corresponding with the peak migration in the fall and the spring, we had teams of undergraduate and graduate research students, research assistants, go out and monitor routes that each took them an hour to walk, and collectively included about 50 buildings. And we selected those buildings for facades that were linked frequently to fatalities. We did this 5 days a week, and the goal was to get both identify specific facades that are most in need of retrofitting at Yale, so resources could be targeted accordingly, but also to show the need for wider scale reform and to be able to work with the facilities department to update campus design requirements to ensure that new buildings are bird safe from the start. Next slide. Here you see just some of our student research assistants for one of the seasons. Next slide. And here are 2 examples of the routes that they walked around the campus. This was the largest scale monitoring study that we know of in Connecticut to date. And due to limited resources, we couldn't include all of the buildings that we would have liked to, and surely missed many collisions as a result, but it was sizable nonetheless. Next slide. And the results were dramatic. These are the birds that the students collected in just 8 weeks in the fall of 2023. Many hundreds of birds were recorded each season. And studies of the bird carcasses indicate that the most common cause of injury for window collisions nationwide is brain damage and brain bleeding, and that seems to be true for the birds that we collected as well. And so while we recorded and found these carcasses that you see, it's safe to say that this is a dramatic undercount of how many birds were actually being killed during this migration period. As Meredith noted at the start, it's now clear to researchers that carcass surveys result in significant undercounts because many of the birds hit, they get stunned, they get injured, they fly away, and they die soon thereafter elsewhere. But they evade the monitoring and the counting. Next slide. So we combined these observations from the research assistants with historic data from the Peabody Museum at Yale and from citizen science observations submitted via iNaturalist to create a master list of over 3,100 bird collisions that have occurred in and around Yale's campus to date over the past 5 years or so. And this data set includes the precise location, the facade where they struck, whether the bird survived or not, the collections number, if the carcass is now stored at the Yale Peabody Museum, the georeferenced location where possible, and more. Next slide. And to share sort of some of what we found, the data demonstrate very convincingly the value of a comprehensive and systematic survey of bird collisions on a campus like Yale's, and I think this is true in cities like Providence and elsewhere as well, where you can see we started this surveying in 2022 and it continued it in 2023 and a little bit in 2024. And you see this massive increase in the number of bird collisions recorded. And really there were no particular new buildings opened in 2022 or 2023 that would explain this. The only difference is that we were looking and we weren't looking previously. And so the scale of the problem was much, much greater than anyone really knew. And I think this data was extremely useful in getting action in various places on campus. Next slide. And as expected, and in line with previous studies, the collisions that we found occurred most frequently during the fall and spring migrations. And based on that data, the fall migration also appeared to be more deadly than the spring migration, which seems to be true for others as well. And in general, these collisions occurred steadily throughout the fall and the spring, but with a few exceptions. We recorded several mass collision events that you see photos of here On one day, for example, on 1 October, 82 birds were killed in a single event at 3 locations on Yale's West Campus. And 62 of those birds were dark-eyed juncos. And so, events like these make us wonder, how rare such events are, and maybe, there have been other such events that have gone totally unrecorded simply because no one was looking. Next slide. So the killed birds represent over 100 species, including species of conservation concern. The majority were migratory songbirds, the most common being dark-eyed juncos, white-throated sparrows, mourning doves, common yellowthroats, and so forth. And the collision victims also included 2 Bicknell's thrushes, which are one of the rarest and most threatened songbirds in the Northeast. And these were the first 2 Bicknell's thrush carcasses killed by window collisions in North America, to our knowledge, and the first specimens and carcasses that were added to the Peabody's collection in over 50 years. There were also multiple Connecticut warblers, which despite their name are extremely rare in Connecticut, among the victims. Next slide. And then in terms of the distribution among the buildings, we recorded collisions at more than 70 different buildings at Yale and in the greater New Haven area. And while the problem is widespread, it became clear that a small number of buildings are responsible for a disproportionate number of collisions. The top 5 or so buildings were responsible for about 50% of the collisions during the time that we monitored. And so this is obviously valuable to know, because then we can target resources accordingly. Next, we made this map to help win over some of the decision makers at Yale to the problem, which was basically a very easy georeference map to make using iNaturalist data showing which buildings the collisions were clustered around, and making the case for the need to address this systematically, given that it's occurring all across Yale's campus. Next, and I'm happy to report that the work so far is working and is starting to make a real impact on Yale's campus in concrete ways. 3 of the 4 most problematic buildings identified by our surveys are now in the process of being retrofitted, at least to some degree. To date, the Yale School of Management, which we started off with, is the #1 bird killer on campus, and it still is. But it now has some feather-friendly window film applied as pilots at the back of the building, and we're hopeful that that will be expanded. But this building was also notable because it's a LEED certified sustainable design building, supposedly. But it really is a building that highlights that relying on LEED certifications to ensure that buildings are bird safe is inadequate. The feather-friendly film there seems to be working beautifully so far. We've seen a dramatic reduction in collisions. And on the next slide, you can see a picture of what that product looks like installed up close. Then we'll skip forward maybe 2 slides for the sake of time. But here's another example of one of the retrofits on Yale's campus. This is Kaleidoscape film, which is another bird-friendly product. And we went from having over 100 birds killed by these walkways seen on the left in the fall prior to their installation, and then 0 in the following spring and fall. So that was wonderful to see. And the next slide shows the partial retrofit installed in September 2023 on the Yale School of Nursing, which was one of these walkways that Meredith described that was extremely deadly. And you can actually see here on the left some of the birds who were killed prior to that installation. And then on the next slide, you can see as well that we've been successful in working with Yale to have several new buildings put up in the interim that have adopted bird-friendly design from the start. So these buildings include ceramic fritting that's permanently embedded into the glass, which you can see in the background of this photo on the right, which allows birds to see it. And they too, in the monitoring, are proving to be very bird safe and have caused little to no fatalities. On the next slide is another example of this, which is a new wing of Yale's Peabody Museum of Natural History that also includes fritted glass. And as you can see, if you were at this building up close and by the glass, you can see the line, and it's certainly visible, but it doesn't obscure your view or obscure the experience of being inside whatsoever. And it's almost hard to even tell that it's there on this slide. And so then lastly, we were successful in getting Yale to update its building design requirements. So there's now quite a rigorous standard in place for new buildings. It does not apply retroactively to old buildings. So we're continuing to try to work to get those bird killing structures addressed and the pilot projects expanded. But it's been quite successful, and the data monitoring efforts have been crucial to that work. So we wish you all the luck with the monitoring in Rhode Island, and if we can be helpful in any way whatsoever, in sharing what we've learned or in whatever way is useful, please do let me know and let us know. I'll pass it back to you, Meredith.
Oh, wow, Viveka, your work is so inspiring and comprehensive, and at the same time, it's a little heartbreaking with some of those numbers and the figures. In this section of the presentation, we'll be talking about how light pollution affects birds, because as I mentioned before, some of the birds that are particularly affected are nocturnally migratory birds. In this case, in Rhode Island, you have about 450 bird species, and over 3/4 of those migrate, and then of those, 80% migrate at night, and that includes species like the black and white and the black-throated green. So the majority of these migratory birds are migrating while we're asleep. They're flying overhead, and here's a screenshot from a birdcast of birds flying over Providence County in May of 2024, and that you had 2 million birds flying over during the nighttime. Well, the research is showing that actually light pollution plays a role in collisions and also in disrupting migratory bird patterns. And the studies just keep coming out one after another that the effects of the artificial lighting on migratory birds is that it's harmful, and that it's causing disturbances, and it's interacting with other conservation pressures on birds. Now, I'm just going to show here, this is a film from the Tribune lights, the 9/11 Tribune lights, that shows birds being caught in the beams, because just so many watts of light is beamed up into the sky right in the beginning of fall migration. And so you can see what happens is the birds get trapped in the light, it's a little bit disturbing, but we're just going to watch here because those objects in the light are actually birds. This shows the attraction that migratory birds have to artificial light. Now, the scientific reason for that hasn't been, uncovered yet, but there's definitely evidence that they are attracted to light, and that's been known for quite some time now. Luckily, the New York Bird Alliance, which is what used to be the New York City Audubon Society, they have an agreement with the Tribune and Light people where if there are 1,000 birds caught in the light, or if a bird collides with a neighboring building, then they'll turn the lights off for a few minutes, and that's enough for the birds to be able to continue on with their journeys. But if you could imagine what it's like for 1,000 migratory birds to all be caught in these lights, it just shows the level of the effect on birds, and also the strong attraction that birds have. Another aspect to this attraction to light is not just outdoor lighting, it's also indoor lighting, which this is the McCormick Place in Chicago when it's all lit up. Now, a 2021 study showed that when 50% of lights at the window bays, that means interior lights, when 50% of the lights were turned off, it reduced collision mortalities by 60%. So you can see here what the building looks like in contrast to when it's fully lit up. Well, when it's fully lit up, it becomes like a beacon for birds that are transiting across Lake Michigan, and ends up bringing them right into a glass area where when they wake up and they start foraging, that they're going to be more likely to collide with the building or fly straight into it, as happened back in October of 2023. But this 2021 study, really showed that the interaction between lighting and collisions, and that lighting reduction can be a strategy towards reducing collisions and also reducing migration disturbance for migratory birds. And I'll just mention this interesting study. This showed, this was a 1967 study that showed that that migratory birds like this indigo bunting that was used in the study actually use constellations in the sky to navigate. This scientist, Stephen Emlin, he actually brought indigo buntings into a planetarium and projected the sky map onto the ceiling of the planetarium, and he used like ink on the birds' feet, and as they were moving around, he could see that they were orienting according to the constellations. It's a 1967 study that proves that birds are like little Magellans, and they're using very, visible illuminated orbs in the night sky to migrate. And so when we have a lot of sky glow and a lot of light pollution, that it can also disrupt their navigation, migratory navigation. Now that has led to efforts across the country of dimming the lights for birds, like with different lights out movements that you might have heard of. It's very active in the state of Texas. A lot of cities have them. We now have lights out Central New York, lights out Connecticut. And these lights out, they both do a lot of the collision monitoring. They also work on the glass problem, but they also work on light pollution. And they've been pretty effective in helping to push for local policies to protect birds. Now, the solution for the light pollution is really to follow artificial lighting standards. This is a grid that's showing the use of controls like lighting, motion sensors, and also timers, that we can use technologies so that buildings will automatically dim or turn on different times of the day when a building is in use or when it's not in use. So this is a very common sustainable building practice now, these design standards around lighting. And they've been put into the International Energy Conservation Code. And sorry. Also, the American Institute of Architects, they have a lighting standard that can be beneficial to birds. And also the lead innovation, collision deterrence, incorporates both glass mitigation as well as lighting. So shows that the solutions can go hand in hand, and that they often are at the level of policy. So then when it comes to what can you do, is to turn off your excess unnecessary indoor and outdoor lights from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. during peak migration, which is starting up in just a few weeks. And with that, I'll turn it over for questions.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. That was fantastic. Well, fantastic in terms of the amount of information it disseminated, not so fantastic in terms of the problem itself. But like I said before we began this evening, it's important that we know what the issues are if we want to be able to do something about them. Before I dive into the Q&A, I just want to make one brief mention of the fact that I will be supplying a link to this evening's recorded town hall to everyone who attended. And in addition to that link, I'm going to be including a link to an online training in case you are interested in participating in the Providence surveys that the Audubon Society of Rhode Island is undergoing. So this would entail you going out and helping to collect data very similar to the data sets that Viveka had alluded to on the Yale campus. So we are always in need of people who are willing to go out and collect information on bird mortality and building collisions. It's not nearly as fun as going out and counting birds in some of our refuges, but it is equally, if not more, important. So with that, I'm going to ask some of the questions from our Q&A to our presenters. And then if we still have time left over, you are welcome to ask questions that you might have. So the first question, actually, Viveka answered in the chat room, but in case you did not see that, the question was, does colored glass make a difference? And can birds perceive colors? The response was, good question. I don't know if colored glass makes a difference. I'm not familiar with any studies that have looked at that. Stained glass in general is very bird safe, but I think that's due to the metal designs rather than the color itself. So that was a question that had already been answered. I'll go ahead and get to the next one. And so our presenters can answer it in real time. Do things like street lights or lights on the house/driveway have the same effect? So I think you kind of went over that, Meredith, but I'll go ahead and let you take the floor and answer it to a greater degree.
Yeah, we do know that study that I mentioned at McCormick Place in 2021, that showed indoor lighting definitely plays a role in collision, but the overall, which showed that you can decrease collisions literally window by window and building by building But the cumulative effect of all of the artificial light that we are putting into the sky, that the recent science is showing that it's increasing 10% every year because of the easy availability of affordable and energy efficient LED lights that people are using. You know, they're saving money on purchasing them, so they're purchasing a lot of them. So we're seeing the night sky is becoming a lot brighter and brighter every year. And that's part of that cumulative effect of when people leave their landscape lighting on, building lights, outdoor walkway lights. And the studies show that they can be safely reduced, either turned off, you know, during certain times of the night when really literally no one's there, or that they can be dimmed by a percentage, like dimmed 60% or 70%, that still remains safe and you can still see where you're going. That's an approach that's been taken in a number of cities in Arizona, where they've basically just reduced the amount of luminescence from the lights, so that lights are on, but they're just not at 100%. And those are just different design solutions. But wherever you can put a timer or a motion sensor on for outdoor lights, it helps at least not attract birds into areas where they shouldn't be or disrupt their migration patterns.
Excellent, thank you. Karen asked, I'm in Warwick, East Greenwich border. Can I still participate? I assume that's in regards to doing surveys for Audubon, Rhode Island, and absolutely you can. Please send me an email tomorrow when I send out the recording, and I'll get you out there collecting data for us. Thanks for the offer. Next question for our presenters. What about other structures, such as wind turbines that are placed in migratory pathways? And the second part of the question, which is really just a completely second question, which is, do ultraviolet stickers work? So I'll let you answer those in any order, and between whichever of the two of you would like to take them.
Sure, I can take those. I'm definitely not an expert on the wind turbine issue. I know it is an issue, and I've seen estimates that are to the effect of like 500,000 birds a year are impacted by that, though I don't know how up to date that is, given that the scale of the wind industry has grown substantially and so forth. But nonetheless, it is an order of magnitude lower than the collision issue, which is over $1 billion in the US per year, and probably significantly over $1 billion. And I think that power lines, like birds flying into power lines and being electrocuted by power lines, is actually an even higher estimate than the wind collisions. But I'll leave it at that, because I'm definitely not an expert on that. Do the ultraviolet window alert stickers work? I've used these personally on my house, and I think the answer is yes, that they work, but they only work effectively if you apply them really densely. So they tend to be sold in packages of, I think, 4 or 5 stickers, which is not going to cut it for the vast majority of windows, because still, you know, if you stick 4 or 5 on a standard size window, there are large gaps that don't follow that 2 by 2 inch rule that Meredith was describing. So the birds may very well see the sticker, but then still think they can dive around and navigate around the stickers through the optical illusion of the transparent glass. So I've personally had mixed success with them, and I think the main issue is that they have mixed success is just that they're not being applied with the numbers needed to really work.
Yeah, that's right. I just want to put like an added comment on about the wind turbines. I'm not an expert on that. I don't study what how they affect with collisions, but I will say this: if there was better practice around lighting, which uses a tremendous amount of wasted energy, energy that's wasted with lighting that's wasted, that if we could work on energy efficiency, maybe we wouldn't need, part of the energy transition. But I just want to say that I do think that we should talk about that in tandem with energy efficiency practices and efforts, because I think that those issues are related.
Thank you for that. I also had someone come in with the comment section that says the ultraviolet stickers do tend to fade and need to be replaced, which is something that I always tell folks, that these the UV decal that you can purchase at most home improvement shops or get online. They do work if you apply them correctly, but within about a year, they'll need to be replaced, whereas some of these more long-term films and dot matrices will last on the order of a decade or longer. So you can go either route, but just keep in mind that if you were to use those UV decals that are very easily accessible, you would be replacing them on an annual basis to achieve the full efficiency of how they work. Next question is, has there been any effort to integrate the bird-friendly window design into LEED standard requirements? I believe you mentioned an example of a building that met LEED standards, but that the standards do not require buildings to have bird-friendly design / windows.
Yeah, so the problem with the LEED standard for birds is the way LEED works is you basically have a menu of items that include everything, including one item for bird friendliness, but items for energy efficiency and how you handle waste and a whole slew of other things. And you pick items and acquire a certain number of points. And if you acquire whatever the required number of points is, you get it to be gold standard or platinum standard, etc. So there's no way to require any specific action of a LEED building. So a building could be LEED certified and do absolutely nothing for birds. I would say it's very helpful. Meredith mentioned that there is a LEED point, or maybe it's even 2 points, I can't remember, that you can get for incorporating bird safety. It's been in there as a pilot for a number of years, and I believe it's now being updated to be more rigorous. And I think that has been very useful because institutions that need to acquire these points or a few points below become much more interested. And we've seen that at Yale as well, of buildings that go up and they need a few more points to become gold, and therefore want to discuss with the Yale Bird-Friendly Building Initiative how they can meet that. So it's useful, but it's just not a guarantee that it's bird safe.
Yeah, because there's going to be LEED version 5 coming out literally any day now. They said early 2025, and we don't know what the bird collision deterrence credits will look like there, how many points they'll be worth. There was a huge advocacy initiative to try to raise that, because right now you earn 1 point for doing bird collision deterrence, which combines both glass treatments plus lighting, but you only get 1 point. And so the advocates were suggesting that it should be worth at least a minimum of 3 points, and just to really emphasize the value of that, of the value of protecting birds and making a healthy habitat. So we'll have to just see in the next few days or weeks what the new LEED credits look like.
Excellent. We're almost out of time here, so I'll ask these two together because they're both relatively small questions. The first is, are twinkle lights on a tree a problem? And the second is, do shut curtains help reduce light at night? So I'll let you take both of those.
Yeah, I would say, the holiday lighting, usually like pollution laws, like the one in Cupertino, it's a bird-friendly building law, and it includes both standards for the glazing or glass, and also includes a light pollution component or lighting control. And they do allow for holiday lighting during certain times of the year, but require that you turn them off at a certain time. I think the problem becomes people turn on their lights and then they leave them on all night long. So, to try to follow that off by 11 p.m. But I will just say, as a underscore to that, is that first of all, trees are living things, and they are also habitat for birds and insects and other, that birds rely on as food sources. So even during the winter, there are different insects and different things that are food for birds that are in those trees. So I haven't seen any studies that show what that effect might be, but I would just consider like keeping them to a minimum, and then to remember that trees are habitat. And then also closing blinds and screens. Yes, planting more native trees, definitely. But closing blinds definitely helps with indoor lights. That's one of the approaches that you can use. It's not a built-in, but definitely if you're up past 11 o'clock, definitely to close blinds definitely helps with the lighting for sure.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to ask this last question, which is, is there any evidence, I'm paraphrasing, is there any evidence that yellow light outside is useful? We've heard that yellow lights detract from issues with moths and butterflies. are there particular colors within the color spectrum that you could use for lighting outdoors that would have less of an impact?
Yeah, there's actually like no consistency across different bird species and bird groups about which color, spectrum light is the best. So that's why I think better thing is to follow the rules such as like only use light when you need it, where you need it, and then to just be really conscious about your lighting choices because every light on is a choice. So I just to be really mindful about lighting practices.
Fantastic. And with that, I think we will close this evening's town hall. I wanted to get everybody out of here by 6:30 at 6:34. So we're pretty close to that mark. And I appreciate all of you taking the time out of your evening to come hear about this very important issue. I hope that you will go forth and become better stewards by putting decals on your own residence, on your convince your neighbors to do the same. Perhaps have a talk with the building manager at your place of work about what might be done there to help with the issue. And I would like to personally extend a thank you to both of our presenters, Meredith and Vivica, for the amazing amount of information that they disseminated this evening. Look forward to receiving the link for tonight's town hall, as well as a link to training with regards to the work that Audubon Rhode Island does to survey downtown Providence and the residential communities in the states. Thank you all very much for coming this evening. Enjoy the rest of your night, and we will see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Nice seeing you, Rebecca. Thank you.